Well, welcome to Dollars and Cents. This week we've got a enjoyable show, hopefully as usual. What makes it more enjoyable is that I am joined this week by one of the fabulous certified financial fiduciaries at Nelson Financial Planning, Rob Field. Good morning. How are you?
Morning, Joel. I'm doing quite well.
Excellent. Thanks for being on the show again. My name, of course, is Joel Garris. We're both with Nelson Financial Planning, where we help you improve your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. So it is September already, Rob, and the original air date of this program will be and is on Sunday, September 15th. So that really does mean that we are halfway through the month of September.
Exactly halfway.
Exactly halfway. And a lot of headlines last week, right? And a lot of headlines this week. And so in this segment, we're going to talk kind of about them. One of the biggest headlines last week, of course, was the 23rd anniversary. Hard to believe, 23 years ago, 9/11. Rob, what were you doing when all of that tragedy went down?
On that day, I was in Columbus, Ohio, at a large conference for all the regional wholesalers with the company that I was with, and we were all gathered there for what was going to be a 3-day event, and it was all positive. Everything was going wonderful. And then we all met the night before and had a great time. And the next morning, the meeting starts. We're not halfway, half hour into it, and then suddenly somebody says, "Wow, there's a small plane hit a building in New York," and then it escalated into 1 to 2, and then the other plane around the Pennsylvania area, and it just killed the mood. I mean, it was just hard to believe. And so then we're obviously. Air traffic stops for a long period of time.
Right, for
so
four or 5 days.
We're sitting there, we got people from East Coast, West Coast, North and South, and couldn't get a flight. Rental cars blew out real quick, and I stayed a couple extra days and just hung out at the home office and did some stuff. But I had a couple of buddies that wanted to get home so bad they went out and bought a car from somewhere in the area and drove home in this car and either gave it to a kid or sold it. They were just whatever you could do to get around. It changed everything dramatically for a while.
Right. No, that's exactly right. I remember being in the office when that happened, watching it play out live on TV, and it was certainly one of those events where I think you'll always remember where you were when it happened, and. So there are a few of those in history. So, good news is that they're not quite as often as probably our minds lead us to believe. But 9/11 certainly one of those that you always kind of remember where you were at that point in time. So hard to believe that was 23 years ago. My now 24-year-old had just been born, and so I remember coming home and not really sure what was going to happen next.
Probably gave him a big hug.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's when I got home. It's like it's hard. It was such a large event that even today, when we think about it, it's the gravity of the situation in the planes and the security that we've now put in place. It's life-changing.
And the uncertainty of what the future was then going to hold. That is really one of those seminal events that underscores and creates just so much uncertainty. And hard to believe, 23 years ago. Speaking of disasters, though, we'll segue to the other news story from last week. Did you catch any of the debate?
I did. I mean, it's over the last few years. It's funny. You're not always watching the debate to really learn about the candidate, but more just for the entertainment value and what are people going to say. But I watched it. As entertaining as it was, one of those candidates will be our president for a 4-year period. So I do want to get to know them, but the mudslinging is crazy. Yeah,
no, it's almost one of those things that happens when you're driving down the road and you see the car wreck and everybody slows down to look at the car wreck. That so entertaining would probably be a loose description of it. As I was listening, I managed to watch it to the first commercial break. I think you said that you shared with me this week that you got through all of it. So congratulations for you on that.
I gave it my best shot.
There you go.
I kept thinking, well, eventually, once they sort of get past arguing and bickering, we'll get down to some details. But a lot of the ideas that were thrown out were just sort of off the cuff. I don't know how substantial or real they could be.
Well, and that is the problem. And I think the reality is, and I'm thinking of an email exchange that I had with a client after the debate this past week. And, you certainly have sort of the litany of proposals on both sides of the equation. But the reality is that those talking points rarely ever actually become real. And let's not forget, by all accounts, regardless of who wins the White House, Congress, which is the part of our government that passes the laws, is in fact going to be pretty evenly divided, which means that you shouldn't see the pendulum swing that much one way or the other. That was certainly the radio show that we did. I think the air date of that was August the 25th. Chet Coward, another one of our certified financial fiduciaries, joined us. And I think it's important to remember, so we wanted to also spend some time talking about this. This political proposition, this election season, it's not an on or off proposition, right, Rob? I think too many people think, well, if Trump gets in, then I'm going to make money, or if Harris gets in, then I'm going to lose money. And I think that's it's not an on-off proposition. I mean, the reality is that there are going to be different sectors that perhaps do well or do better, but the reality is that there's certainly going to be different businesses, different companies that will fare well, depending upon sort of which administration and which policies actually become law. Right.
I mean, whether it's the election or when COVID hit, everybody's like, oh, well, everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket. But the answer was some companies benefit. And when 9/11 occurred, not that you want to benefit or take advantage of something, but some companies rise up with a product or an idea that can be helpful at that moment. So regardless of who becomes the president, it's still a long-term game on your investments. And then, as you've mentioned before, you got to look at what the Fed does to really get a feel for what might change.
Sure. Well, and that's a nice segue to talk about the week ahead, because the big headline for the week ahead is the Federal Reserve and the meeting that is happening on Wednesday. So just like last week, there was the 9/11 anniversary presidential debate, big headline type of events. This coming week, also the big headline event, of course, is the Federal Reserve meeting on Wednesday, where I guess, at least according to what everybody expects, you will start to see them begin to cut interest rates. And certainly that's going to be a prominent topic of conversation.
Right. We're still in line for what they wanted originally, which was the soft landing. They slowly moved it up, kept rates at a certain point, made sure that inflation was slowing down like they wanted, and now they will hopefully continue that same path and slowly reduce the rates. There's a lot of things they're looking at, but they're making good progress. And so at some point, you got to get activity starting to flow a little bit. That means make it a little less expensive to borrow the money. Got to bring rates down.
And that is widely expected to happen this coming week, or at least the start of that. And certainly the other thing, that, of course, that is happening this week is the day after that, where our our fall lineup of client event kicks off. So we'll have one of our client educational sessions on Thursday. So that will be the week ahead, where we'll be talking about some of the investment themes that are going to be some of the most important things to be thinking about going forward, regardless of who wins the election one way or the other.
Right.
So all of that, we will have much more on. We're going to take a break here on Dollars and Cents, but we'll continue after these messages. So stay tuned to Dollars and Cents with your hosts, Joel Garris and Rob Field of Nelson Financial Planning. So welcome back to the program, Dollars and Cents. Rob, we spent the first segment of the show just kind of recapping the headlines. It's September, a busy month. Last week, the anniversary of 9/11. You had the presidential debates. This week coming up, you've got the Federal Reserve meeting. And then closer to home at Nelson Financial Planning, we have one of our client educational sessions coming up on Thursday, which sort of kicks off sort of our fall lineup of events that we do for our clients at Nelson Financial Planning. Pretty big schedule that we've got on tap over the next few months between now and the end of the year.
Well, definitely. I mean, the client educational dinners are great. Bring in a specialist who's talking about the economy and markets in general, always truly educational. We've got a client appreciation dinner coming up where we're not lecturing or trying. We're just simply thanking our clients for coming and joining us. We do a November breakfast. I always enjoy that because breakfast is one of my favorite meals. So once a year we have a way where clients can come in that don't want to come at night, come for a morning session. We're going to do a shred day. We always do a food drive and a toy drive, and sometimes an animal drive for the SPCA or something like that. So yeah, a lot of it's coming up. I'll mention obviously in the various emails that you send out or the last letter.
That is correct. And last week we sent a reminder of the event coming up this week, and also sort of tease the topic of what that conversation will be all about. Some of the investment themes that are a little bit more back to the future-esque, if you will. If you're a client, you got an email that kind of ran some parallels to some of the investment themes that we think are going to be important in the future. Tie that into sort of the Back to the Future movie, which, by the way, celebrates its 40th anniversary next year. Hard to believe that the original Back to the Future was 40 years ago.
40th anniversary. Why does that ring a bell?
Exactly.
40th anniversary.
We celebrated that earlier this year at Nelson Financial Planning. But yeah, certainly next week on the program, we'll be talking about the Federal Reserve, because that's obviously big, and also be sharing some of those investment insights, some of those investment themes, if you will, that we think are going to be important for the road ahead. Of course, the beauty is if you are a client of Nelson Financial Planning, you get to go to the educational dinner and get to hear that ahead of time. But we will certainly share that with our entire radio and podcast audience on the program next week, so stay tuned on that. Also on this week's show, Rob, we got a couple of other things that are also coming from the headlines. The first one has to deal with this massive data breach, and it seems like every week there's another one of these, and this one is the headline involving national public data, which was a big breach of personal information and data that happened as well.
Right. We're going to talk a little bit about that and then some ideas we have on how to be prepared. But you bring up a good point. Every week or so you find out something new. These people that are the hackers and the scammers, they're just always one step ahead. As soon as you figure out a way to kind of thwart what they're trying to do, they've already got the next kind of thing. And we hear it from our clients from time to time where they get a call and they honestly believe that it's legit when it's not. Yeah,
no, that is true. Sadly, in that particular case, it is a situation of it's not a matter of if, but unfortunately when. Also coming from the headlines as well, a little bit of conversation about some of the issues or the traps that people fall into when it comes to inheriting money. This one's particularly interesting, Rob, because you found this article. It's an AARP article. It's got some interesting stuff. Obviously, in our book, Next Gen Dollars and Cents, we wrote a chapter 20 is on the pitfalls of inheriting money. What was unique about this article that you shared, Rob, is that it had a lot of stuff that we actually didn't cover in the book even.
Right. I mean, the book goes into great detail and covers a lot of subjects, but this one article we saw where it was the seven inheritance mistakes you can make and then how to avoid them. There's a couple of new items that popped up in that article we thought we would share with the clients.
Very good. Good stuff indeed. So let's set the stage. So with this data breach with involving national public data, that particular company, what are we talking about? What happened there? How do people find out if they were impacted as a result of this?
Yeah, I did a little research, and I'm just going to share it with our radio audience. We're going to look a little bit at data breaches, how they occur, how to utilize a credit freeze or a fraud alert, and then why your credit score needs also to be constantly reviewed. So you were talking a little bit about that National Public Data Group. So a data breach in general, it's any security incident in which an unauthorized party gets access to sensitive or confidential information. So a breach is your information is now out being used by somebody that you did not authorize to do so.
Somebody got access to something that had your personal information, and it's not a statement as to whether it's been used improperly or not. It's just the notion that somebody now has access to it.
Correct. So we knew back in 2017 was the big one at that point, where Equifax had announced that they'd been hacked and about half of the U.S. population's Social Security numbers were now available to malicious people. And at that point, that was like, well, everybody got serious about trying to avoid it, but boom, next thing you know, this year we have the National Public Data Group. They suffered a breach, and it's even larger, the number of personal items that were stolen. So if indeed one of your credit-related accounts has been misused or hacked, there are ways to protect yourself. And so we're going to talk about some of the websites that you can do, some of the information. If it's a particular firm, sometimes they'll offer you 1 year of security protection just through their firm, but it's temporary and it's not really that extensive. So we want to talk about a credit freeze, which is an option. So, what is a credit freeze, which basically prevents creditors from viewing your credit file whenever you might apply for a credit card, a loan, a mortgage, or even just to rent an apartment. The bank or the landlord is going to evaluate your credit and the risk of approving you. So a freeze blocks them from retrieving your credit information, thereby preventing an attacker from taking out new credit in your name. Now, a fraud alert, that's a notice to the credit bureau that on your credit report, it alerts creditors that you may have already been a victim of fraud or identity theft. So you can freeze your credit, or you can actually let them know that you are a victim.
So really, in this particular case, and with any particular case, obviously the National Public Data issue, the information that they were holding is information that was sort of like that personal information. Like if you've ever done an application, or with DocuSign as well, we use DocuSign at the office, and so what happens with that is, particularly like with tax returns, is you get a bunch of questions about what color was the Ford that you owned. And you have to pick the color. It's that data that the folks at National Public Data Company had. That obviously is pertinent data that's used for security purposes, and so as you point out, Rob, if people find that they were subject to that, and there's a specific website that you can go to confirm whether in fact that you were one of the ones that were hacked, and that website is NPD, National Public Data, npdbreach.com. There you can go put your social in, things like that. But most importantly, as you've just pointed out, listeners have a couple of options. They've got sort of the fraud alert, which is not as stringent. It's more like a notification.
Correct.
So if I'm a creditor and I'm checking your credit and I see the fraud alert, it says, wait a minute, something might be amiss here. Then what that creditor has to do is to maybe call you, verify things, or take extra steps in order to verify, versus a freeze, which is much more stringent, right? A freeze is, as the name suggests, you're locked out in terms of credit unless you do some additional things in writing and the like, should you want to apply for new credit.
Right. If you put in the credit freeze, it shuts down everything, including the fact, now you can still use your current credit cards, but if for some reason or another you go out and you decide you want to buy something or apply for a new credit card, you're going to have to unfreeze your account first and notify them and then go back. So if you're in the middle of, you forget you got a freeze, you're like, I think I'm going to go ahead and buy a motorcycle, and then you're at the dealership, you got to tell them, hey, by the way, I have a freeze on my account. Give me a few minutes. I got to call in, I got to have it removed, and we can move forward. That takes about an hour. So you just got to, it's a great thing to have, but to unfreeze it, you need to also be prepared for what that entails.
So definitely a little bit more work, a little bit more burden on you. There's a lot more to unpack on this, so we're going to talk more about this. But first, we're going to slide to the break. This is Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. One of Central Florida's longest-running radio programs, coming to you on a host of stations throughout the region. My name is Joel Garris. Joining me this week is Rob Field. Both of us are certified certified financial fiduciaries at Nelson Financial Planning. We'll look forward to continuing the conversation on credit freezes versus fraud alerts after these messages. So welcome back to the program. This course is Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. On this segment, Rob, we're trying to help people make sense of what some of these fraud alerts and credit freezes are all about, particularly in light of the most recent headlines involving the massive data breach that occurred at National Public Data Company. They're the ones that keep track of stuff, of this information that comes to us with questions that verify our identity. So if you've ever been asked questions like what was the color of your first car, or what was the make of your first car, that kind of stuff, that's the information that they warehouse. And it was a pretty significant data breach, that's for sure.
It was one of the largest as of late, and really kind of brought articles like this to mind and gave you and I the idea that, hey, we need to make sure we kind of share some stuff with our radio listeners that could be helpful to them, because we hear stories all the time about somebody that is scammed or fraud hit them. And when they tell us the stories, they sound really believable. I'm kind of like, I could see where you might actually think that was true.
Right. No question at all. These are professional criminals, and as such, they have a skill level that allows them to be pretty good at their job. And so before the break, we were talking about the difference between a fraud alert versus a credit freeze. How do you go about putting one of those on your credit profile in the first place, Rob?
So placing that credit freeze is pretty easy. It's free. Just requires you to reach out to each of the credit reporting bureaus and notifying them what's going on. There are links and phone numbers available online to get to each of the three. And in a few moments, if we have some time, I can share that information. Again, if you have the credit freeze in place, if you want to apply for credit, it's really easy. You just remove the credit freeze. It won't keep you from using your current credit cards while the freeze is on. A lot of people ask, well, could an attacker try to freeze my account? Just they can do so many things. And the answer would be kind of difficult, because to lift that freeze, you got to either have an account that you set up the freeze with the bureau. You got to have a password. You can have a PIN, personal identification number. Keep that close to home, and we can't emphasize the importance of don't use the same PIN for everything, because people, the scammers figure out pretty quickly that if they have a PIN, they use it over and over and over, and if it keeps working, they've hit the jackpot.
Right. Well, more often than not, we as humans, we have a tendency to use the same PIN.
Right. I mean, I'm kind of guilty of it too, because I can remember it.
Right. No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And the beauty, what is easy if you're trying to do a fraud alert or credit freeze, is that there are 3 different credit bureaus. All it takes is to call one. You don't need to call all 3. You can call one. Once you call one, then they're required to notify the other 2, and ultimately that's how you can ultimately get that on your particular credit profile. So what else should people be doing? How do you go through this process of unfreezing or working through kind of having these alerts on your credit profile?
Right. So people always ask, well, when should I put a freeze on my account? And it's anytime you're concerned. A lot of people say if you're asking if you should, you probably already have something on your mind. It's easy to do. It can save you a lot of headaches. Place it. And just understand that if you need to remove it, don't forget to get that done before you go apply for new credit.
I actually have had for several years a fraud alert on my personal credit profile. A few years ago, someone was trying to kind of borrow money under my name at a variety of banks here in Central Florida. And so I've had that fraud alert for years. Now, with the fraud alert, the kind of the pain thing is that you have to renew that every year. So you have to call and say, hey, I want to continue that fraud alert. However, if there's an actual crime where you filed a police report, then you have the ability to actually get that, have that on your credit profile for an extended period of time.
Right. Whereas the credit freeze, you put it on, it's on there indefinitely.
Right.
So, and so it works. It's great. Just keep in mind that if you down the road you're a little more comfortable, you want to buy something, you will need to remove that freeze. But then you just put it right back on.
Well, and then this also dovetails into sort of your credit score, right? So anytime you have an issue with any type of credit, then it can also impact your credit score as well.
Right. I mean, pay attention to your credit reports, your accounts, balances, and things like that. You want to look at your bank account, your credit card statement, your investment accounts. A lot of people just assume that they're accurate. But, you know, if you see some activity you don't recognize, you want to jump on it pretty quick, because the longer it's in place, the easier it is for the fraudsters to continue and invade your space. What happens a lot is, like, on your credit card, we all have a lot of streaming services. Like, I know I've got ESPN, and then I've got my Yahoo TV, and then all these different things add up, and now you want to watch movies. And so they get on your credit card, and you just assume, you see every month a bunch of charges, and you just keep moving along. The fraudster will, like, sneak in and say, okay, I'm going to just throw in a charge for $8.99. Doesn't really stick out. You don't dispute it. Next thing you know, it's $12.99, $15.99, and the fraudster just keeps doing this until they realize that, or until you realize that what you've got going there is truly a fraud. Yeah,
I had that happen with Temu. It may not be the exact. It was a Chinese website that. So I kept seeing this stuff pop up where it was getting used abroad, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's not me.
Right. But now the people, you've got to keep an eye on it, and people are using it. It's there's a good and bad of a credit card, right? It's easy to pay the exact amount you want, to have it on file, but you're just using it like there's no tomorrow. You don't always keep track of it, and you just got to kind of pay attention. Again, I know people want, I want the airline points, and so they're like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use it, max it out, but I'll pay it every month, which is good. But they still don't check the actual transactions.
No, that's exactly right. And sometimes it's not even scammers. Sometimes it's just family members that can mess up your credit report.
Right. We're going to talk about a couple of examples where your credit report can be affected, and it was not by anybody who was purposely doing it. It was just a family member. A lot of times on joint accounts, like your checking account and your balance, whether it's high or low, that doesn't affect your credit score. But if you have a joint account and then suddenly relationship ends, or things don't go well, you go through a divorce, if somebody starts writing checks and they're bouncing, that's fraud, and it'll affect you because you're on that checking account. Other thing that people do a lot is they co-sign for a loan. Okay, a kid wants a car, or friend is like, I could get so much a better rate if you would help me out, if you'd co-sign. Sounds great until that person can't pay the bill, because you're on the note. You're the one who's going to be responsible. Another thing we see a lot is authorized users on an account, especially on the credit card side. Very nice, right? Say, okay, you can use my card, go make purchases for me. You're off at college, you can use the card, I'll help you out. Maybe we'll help you build up your credit. But if that person goes to Vegas, or, again, relationship goes bad and they just run up a big balance, that's on you. That credit card is in your name, which would affect your credit score.
Because if you are a legally an authorized user, I know I have a separate credit card that's kind of like the kids away from college credit card, and the reason we do that is, if they lose it, then it's less painful to replace that card for them.
Right.
Plus, it also then has a consequence for losing the card versus my primary card, where so much is tied into it in terms of auto bill that I wouldn't want to have to reconnect all of those different subscriptions to a credit card. So, but they are authorized users on that particular card. The card is in my name. I sign for it. But yeah, you do have to kind of watch that. If they're running up the limit or spending too much on it, then very quickly that can also impact your credit score.
Sure, especially if they're running it up and you don't pay off the bill, or are not aware of the bill. Because a lot of times the example you're talking about, they'll get that second card. It's really never used by the original owner. It's just to help out the kid or whoever is on there. So they don't always really pay attention because they're not using that card themselves. Then a couple of months go by, card's got a big balance. Nobody's paying it off. Boom, credit score gets a hit.
Correct. Nope, that's exactly right. And so all of this correlates well with making sure that protecting your credit score as well, protecting yourself through fraud alerts, credit freezes, but also protecting that credit score as well. So some interesting topics here in terms of just from the headlines and why it's important to understand the difference between fraud alerts, credit freezes, what you need need to know on those in order to successfully place those on your credit report. When we come back, I'm going to have you give those numbers out, Rob, the website one more time for people to see if they were a victim of the national public data breach. And then we're going to talk about another birthday that passed, that not yours, but something that you like to talk a lot about. And we'll do that after these messages here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris, Rob Field of Nelson Financial Planning. So we've been talking a lot about the most recent headline involving the biggest hack of personal data, courtesy of the data breach that happened at National Public Data Company. And so we want to make sure that folks have that information. So if you want to find out whether you were impacted, there is a specific website that is set up for that. So you go to that website and put in your information and get to find out, and probably more likely than not you were. But what's that website for people to go to, Rob?
Sure. So that's going to be for the national public data that we talked about earlier. That'll provide you information if you've been hacked or if your information is in jeopardy. The website is npdbreach, npdbreach.com. They'll provide you details. You also have access to getting a copy of your own credit report. You can go to annualcreditreport.com and then pull out your report, take a look at that. The credit bureaus themselves, as Joel mentioned, if you contact one, the other two will be notified if you're putting on the freeze or the fraud alerts. You have Equifax.com, and that phone number is also 800-685-1111. There's Experian.com at 888-397-3742. And then there's TransUnion.com, 888-909-8872. Those are the three credit bureaus.
Certainly good to check out that credit report from time to time. You're allowed to get one free a year to see and make sure that, as we were talking about earlier in the program, make sure that maybe somebody you co-signed a loan with or somebody as an authorized user on your credit card isn't messing up your credit score. So that's how you would go about checking out all of that. To the extent you want to place a credit freeze or the lesser fraud alert, then certainly contacting one of those credit bureaus is a great way to do that. So talking a lot on the program this week about kind of some current headlines. Last week, of course, the anniversary of 9/11 and the presidential debate. The week coming up, we've got the Federal Reserve meeting and also our sort of our fall kickoff, if you will, at Nelson Financial Planning in terms of the client educational dinner on Thursday. But there's another date in there, Rob, where I think this happened since the last time you were on the program, so we wanted to take a moment and highlight it. This one is kind of near and dear to your heart as a national Social Security advisor. What was the date that passed here recently?
All right, wouldn't be a radio show I'm on without trying to throw in my 2 cents on Social Security.
There you go.
So today we're going to do more of a little history lesson and just talk about what's going on. So in August of this year, Social Security hit its 89th anniversary. So we're coming up on almost 90 years that the Social Security program has been in place. We talk a little bit about, what led up to it. This all happened right after the big stock market crash in the 30s, and then we went into the Great Depression. At that point, there maybe some companies were paying out pensions, but we didn't have Social Security at all of what we know today. So, America was slipping into a big economic depression right after that crash. GNP went from $105 billion in 1929 down to $55 billion in 1932. And then the wages that were paid to workers declined from $50 billion in 1929 down to $30 billion in 1932. So big reductions in growth and also income going to various Americans.
If you think about just how dramatic that period of time was and the legislation that came out, I mean, obviously, Rob, you're giving the breakdown on Social Security, but a lot of the rules that exist for the stock market weren't around in 1929.
Right.
And so when we think about the two main acts, it's the Securities Act of 1933. So again, that's not in the 1920s. And then the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. Those were the two seminal pieces of legislation that also passed around this period of time. It kind of amazes you to think that the folks in Washington actually got some stuff done and passed major pieces of legislation, and a lot during this period of time. But I guess that's reflective of the fact that it really was a pretty dramatic crisis. So they put their differences aside and got something done. And Social Security now just celebrated its 89th birthday. And my goodness, it is a major part of society and a big part of the conversation when it comes to politics and the federal deficit and all of those kinds of things as well. That's for sure.
Right. I mean, it's in place. It's been doing a great job for generating income for people for many, many years. There's always the conversation about the future of Social Security and what should be done and should you change this or change that. And that's always part of in the political conversations that people are having. You know, once Social Security got into place, immediately they were starting to develop a system to get out monthly payments to help out. Because as you mentioned, before we had the regulations in the stock market, it was the Wild Wild West. Everybody was making money hand over fist. There was really no concern about income. And then when that dropped, it was huge. I mean, people became unemployed. They didn't have much in savings. Nobody had, a lot of the companies that were maybe going to pay a pension were now not even existing. So Social Security wanted to step in such a way to help Americans get out of poverty. So 1934, it was enacted. They put it in place along with some of the other regulations you were describing. 1937 is when they made their first payout. So it was in place a couple of years. Somebody qualified for Social Security. They got $22.34 a month.
Okay.
And so it was a nice start.
That's where it started, not 89 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Then in 1950, they started realizing, hey, maybe we need to build this up for the cost of living adjustments as inflation was going along. So at that point, they did one cost of living adjustment. 1972, it became a rule that every year they'll review cost of living adjustments. And most often they've actually bumped it up somewhat. You can argue that it's not really keeping up with inflation in the big time, but my thought is a increase is better than no increase. So
that's interesting. So in the first 35 years of the program, there was only one cost of living adjustment.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Nobody really thought, hey, we should make it. You want to make Social Security competitive, and that's always important. And even today, we want to make it, a good outlet for people to get a subsidy during the time, but a lot of people are now on Social Security.
Yeah, that's the next set of numbers. So where did we start from, and where are we now?
All right, so Social Security gets implemented a couple of years. It starts. So in 1937, when benefits were starting to pay out, money went to 52,000 Social Security beneficiaries. Seems like a lot. And for a total of about 1,278,000.
The total amount of payout to those 50-odd thousand beneficiaries was about $1.2 million.
Right.
Yeah.
So we jump up to today, and now we've got 71 million Social Security recipients, and last year paid out $1.5 trillion in benefits.
That's about 20%, over 20% of the population.
Right.
Yeah.
And then that brings up the next conversation people have is like, well, how big is the trust fund? How much money is coming in from people working? And that's where people start to think we need to do another overhaul of Social Security of some sort. But
well, what's different than today versus 1937 is people are living longer.
Correct.
That is a big difference versus what the statistics were back in 1937. Certainly something to be mindful of as we think about the 89th anniversary of Social Security that just happened here about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Right. And we're as we always do, Social Security is going to be a part of your financial planning. But we also realize we've run numbers. Some people are only going to get 30, 40% of their income that they've been earning back from Social Security. So you can't count on Social Security alone to help you really be comfortable in retirement. So that's where we try to step in. It's kind of a three-legged stool, I think of. There's Social Security, there's whatever personal savings you have there at your bank or at home, and then the investments. And you have time now to sort of plan ahead and make sure that those all coordinate and get you to where you want to be in retirement.
No, that is true. Certainly important to maintain that overall picture, that overall perspective. And that's what we do each and every week here on the program. And that's also why we wrote our book last year, Next Gen Dollars and Cents, available on Amazon. Also, a couple weeks ago, rolled it out as an ebook as well. So you make sure you check it out on your favorite Kindle or similar type of device, if that's what you're using to read books. Then it is available in that format as well. So this has been, of course, Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channels as well. If you have any trouble finding them, go to our website, Nelson Financial Planning. There you can also request an absolutely free consultation, which of course we do at no obligation, but happy to sit down and discuss your options, or maybe give you a second opinion on what you're currently doing. We'll wrap it up and get on out of here. This has been Joel Garris and Rob Field at Nelson Financial Planning, and you've been listening to Dollars and Cents.